After my brother's future mother-in-law recognized the scar my family never explained? I'm Elizabeth, 33, and for most of my life being the oldest child meant being the emergency contact, the backup plan, and the person expected to notice what everyone else conveniently ignored. My younger brother Adrian is 29. He was the family miracle. I was the person assigned to keep the miracle comfortable. I used to tell myself every family had its unfair spots. Mine just happened to be shaped exactly like me. When we were kids, the differences were small enough that I could explain them away. If Adrian left his bedroom looking like a tornado had gone through it, Mom would stand in the doorway, sigh and say, "Elizabeth, help your brother clean this up." If I asked why, she would answer, "He's younger. You know better." When he forgot a school project until 10 at night, I was the one cutting poster board on the kitchen floor while he complained that he was tired. When he broke a glass casserole dish roughhousing in the kitchen, Mom looked at me and asked why I hadn't been watching him. I was 12. He was 8. Even then, something in me knew the math didn't work. But whenever I pushed back, Mom had a way of making my resistance sound like cruelty. Her name is Margaret. She's polished in front of other people, the kind of woman who remembers birthdays, sends thank you cards, and brings food when someone is sick. She also knows how to turn a room cold with one look. Dad Russell rarely yelled. He didn't need to. "Don't embarrass your mother." That was his favorite line. He said it when I cried at 16 because Mom made me cancel plans to stay home with Adrian. He said it when I refused to give Adrian money after he spent his entire paycheck and then needed gas. He said it when I finally told Mom that being the older sibling didn't make me a second parent. Don't embarrass your mother. As if her embarrassment mattered more than whatever had happened to me. Adrian learned the system early. I don't mean that he was some evil child plotting against me. He wasn't. He was a kid who figured out that consequences were negotiable if someone else could absorb them. Usually that someone was me. By high school, he had mastered the shrug. He would leave dirty dishes in the living room, forget appointments, borrow things without asking, and if I complained, Mom would say, "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" When I was 22 and Adrian was 18, he borrowed $400 from me because he said he needed it for a school expense. A month later, I found out he had used most of it on concert tickets and a weekend trip with friends. I asked him when he planned to pay me back. He looked genuinely annoyed. "Mom said you were fine." I remember staring at him. "What does Mom have to do with the money you borrowed from me?" He shrugged. "She said you don't need it right now." That conversation bothered me more than the money. It was the casual certainty. My things were apparently family property if Adrian wanted them badly enough. When I confronted Mom, she gave me the heavy sigh. "Don't make him feel bad. He's under a lot of pressure." I was under pressure when I worked for that money. Elizabeth. Just my name. Flat and a warning. Then Dad walked in, heard half the argument and said, "Family is family." That phrase came up whenever family needed something from me. It almost never came up when I needed something from them. The strangest part was that I spent years thinking this meant I was strong. Mom called me dependable, mature, capable. She said Adrian was sensitive while I was built for more. If I got tired, I was selfish. If Adrian got tired, he needed support. If I said no, I was keeping score. If he forgot a promise, I needed to be understanding. By my late 20s, I had started setting small boundaries. Nothing dramatic. I stopped paying Adrian's parking tickets. I stopped dropping whatever I was doing because Mom decided an ordinary inconvenience was a family emergency. I stopped going over every Sunday if I knew I would end up cooking, serving, clearing dishes, and being criticized for leaving before dessert. The first time I told Mom, "I'm not available for that." After she asked me to spend a Saturday helping Adrian reorganize his garage, she went silent for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "You're acting like you're better than us." I said, "I'm busy. You never used to be like this." That was true. I used to be easier to use. The more boundaries I set, the more Mom rewrote me as bitter. By the time Adrian got engaged to Hannah, I had apparently become the family problem. Hannah was nice to me but cautious. I could tell she had heard stories. Nothing direct at first, just little things. "You and Adrian have such different personalities," she once said. "We do. He says you've always been kind of independent. That word had Mom's fingerprints all over it. Independent meant difficult when applied to me. Adrian and Hannah planned an engagement dinner with both families a few months before the wedding. It was supposed to be intimate, around a long dining table with handwritten place cards, candles, past side dishes, and the kind of awkward speeches people give when two families are still learning each other. I almost didn't go. Then Adrian called. Can you please just come and be normal for one night? I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. What does normal mean? You know what I mean. No, I don't. He lowered his voice. Don't make things weird with Mom. There it was. His biggest concern was never whether Mom treated me badly. It was whether I reacted in a way that made other people notice. I went anyway. Not for Mom. Not even for Adrian exactly. I liked Hannah, and I didn't want to make her engagement dinner into some kind of statement. When I arrived, there were little cream-colored place cards on the table. Hannah's family was already there. Her mother, Grace, had a calm, observant way about her. She was friendly without being nosy. Mom was in full performance mode. She talked about Adrian as if she were giving a Lifetime Achievement Award. How kind he was. How responsible. How family-oriented. At one point she said, "He's always had such a good heart." I nearly choked on my water. Adrian caught my expression and smirked. Then before everyone had even finished eating, Mom leaned toward me. "Elizabeth, sweetheart, can you help in the kitchen for a second?" It wasn't really a question. I looked at the table. Hannah was still eating. So was Grace. So were the men. I said, "What needs to be done?" "Just help me clear and get dessert ready." Hannah immediately said, "We can all clear in a minute." Mom smiled. "Oh, it's fine. Elizabeth knows where everything goes." That sentence summed up my childhood so perfectly that I almost laughed. I stood up, took 2 plates, and carried them into the kitchen. When I came back, Grace was watching me. Not pitying me. Just noticing. That mattered later. After dessert, Hannah's father made a short toast. Then Grace asked me a harmless question. "So what was Adrian like when you two were growing up?" I smiled. "Messy." Adrian laughed. "Still am," I said. "He once hid an entire bag of candy under his bed, forgot about it, and blamed me when ants showed up." Grace laughed. Before I could say anything else, Mom cut in. "Elizabeth always remembers things in a way that makes her the victim." The table went quiet. The comment was so sharp and unnecessary that even Mom seemed to realize she had overplayed it. She smiled immediately, like she could turn it into a joke. Adrian helped her. "She just likes acting like she raised me." He laughed. Nobody else did. Hannah looked at him. I set my fork down. Mom gave me that look. The one that said if I responded, I would be the problem. Normally, I would have swallowed it. That night I didn't. I said very calmly, "Be careful, Mom. I still have receipts for the version of this family you keep selling." Mom's smile disappeared. Dad looked at me. "Elizabeth." I looked at him. "What?" "Don't embarrass your mother." There it was again. Mom leaned back in her chair. "See? This is what I mean. Everything has to become some grievance with her. She has no idea how lucky she's been." I didn't say anything. She kept going. "We gave her everything." Dad said, "Margaret." But she was already angry. "You were lucky we kept you." The words landed strangely. Not emotionally at first. Literally. "Kept me?" Grace's face changed. It was small. Her eyes lifted from Mom to me. Dad put down his glass. "This is not the place." Mom blinked, realizing she had said something she hadn't meant to say. Then she tried to patch it. I mean, kept putting up with her attitude. Obviously. Nobody laughed. The conversation limped forward after that. A few minutes later, Hannah suggested photos. We all got up and moved near the fireplace. I was standing beside Grace when I tucked my hair behind my ear. I have a pale crescent-shaped scar just under my jaw on the left side. It isn't large, but it becomes visible when my hair is pulled back. Grace looked at it and froze. Not dramatically. Just long enough for me to notice. She asked, "How did you get that scar?" I touched it. "I don't really know. I've had it since I was a baby." Mom answered from across the room before I could say anything else. "She was always clumsy as a child." I turned. "I just said I had it as a baby." Mom started rearranging people for the photo. "Well, you know what I mean." Grace looked from me to Mom. Then she said nothing. That silence bothered me more than if she had asked another question. The next afternoon, Grace called. I almost didn't answer because I barely knew her. When I did, she sounded careful. "Elizabeth, I hope this isn't inappropriate." "That depends." She gave a nervous little laugh. "Fair." Then she took a breath. "I wanted to ask you something about last night." I already knew. "The scar." "Yes." I sat down. She asked me my birthday. Then she asked if I had ever been told I had a procedure as an infant. I said no. Then she asked, "Does the name Lillian mean anything to you?" Something cold moved through my stomach. "No." "Why?" Grace was quiet for a second. "I knew a woman named Lillian a long time ago. Not extremely well, but well enough to remember something about her baby." I gripped the phone harder. "What's something?" "A small procedure. The baby was left with a crescent scar under the jaw." I didn't speak. Grace continued quickly. "I'm not saying you're that child. I don't know that. I don't want to give you a theory and disrupt your life over a coincidence." "Then why are you calling?" "Because of something else." "What?" "Do you have a silver baby bracelet?" "Very small. Initials engraved inside." I stopped breathing for a second. There was an old silver bracelet in a document box at my parents' house. I had seen it maybe 3 times in my life. When I was a teenager, I once picked it up while helping Mom look for tax papers. She snatched it out of my hand so quickly I thought I had broken something. "That's not yours," she had said. I feigned ignorance. "What initials?" I asked. She said 2 letters. They matched. I ended the call not long after that. Not because I thought Grace was lying, because I was suddenly afraid she wasn't. That night I drove to my parents' house. I still had a key. Mom and Dad were out at a dinner, and I knew exactly where the document box was. It was kept in the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet in Dad's study, underneath expired warranties and a stack of old appliance manuals. Mom had told me years ago not to touch it because it contained private family paperwork. I had obeyed. That night I didn't. The box smelled like paper and dust. I found the bracelet first. Tiny. Silver. Tarnished dark around the clasp. I turned it over in my palm and saw the initials Grace had given me. My hand started shaking. Under the bracelet were old insurance forms, envelopes, transfer slips, and letters. Some papers had my name. Some used only initials. One hospital document listed my birth date and identifying details, but the mother's name had been partly obscured by a folded piece of paper that had been taped over it years ago. The tape had yellowed. I carefully lifted the edge. Lillian. I sat on the floor. I think I stayed there for 10 minutes without moving. Then I found a letter. It was handwritten. The paper was soft at the folds. The letter thanked Margaret for agreeing to help. "Until things are settled. Mention me." Not by the name Elizabeth, but as the baby. There was a line that made my chest hurt so badly I had to stop reading. "Please make sure she grows up knowing she was wanted." I read it 3 times. Then I found a transfer receipt. The memo line said, "For the child." The money went into an account controlled by my parents. I took photos of everything with my phone, then stopped. Photos weren't enough. I went home with the bracelet, the letter, and copies of documents I could safely take without destroying anything. I didn't confront my parents. That surprised me. All my life I had imagined that if I ever found proof of some huge betrayal I would explode. Instead I became very calm. I wanted facts. Not theories. Not family stories. Proof. The next morning I searched my old voicemail archive because something had started nagging at me. About a year earlier, Aunt Lorraine had left me a voicemail after a family argument. She must have thought she had hung up, because the message kept recording. At the end, I heard her say to someone in the room, "Margaret said Elizabeth can never know." At the time, I assumed it was about whatever argument we had been having. Now I listened again. Then again. Lorraine sounded nervous. The sentence was followed by, "I told her this would come back eventually." I saved the file in 3 places. Grace helped only with practical information. That distinction matters. She didn't tell me who I was. She told me where to look. She remembered the hospital system Lillian had used. She remembered the approximate year. She gave me enough detail to request old records through the formal records portal. Some records had been archived. I had to send identification and a certified request. I also ordered a DNA test. Then I contacted an estate attorney because the financial papers worried me as much as the identity question. I sent him copies of what I had. He told me not to accuse anyone of theft until we knew what the documents actually meant. He also told me to preserve everything, make backups, and move all important communication into writing. That advice probably saved me from making the situation worse. The waiting was awful. I would wake up at 3 in the morning and wonder whether I had misunderstood everything. Maybe Lillian was an aunt. Maybe there had been some temporary guardianship arrangement. Maybe Mom had said kept you because she was angry. Maybe the scar was a coincidence. Then I would read the letter again. Please make sure she grows up knowing she was wanted. I had never been told that. Not once. Growing up, Mom's favorite version of my childhood was that I had always been difficult. A difficult baby. A stubborn child. A dramatic teenager. Ungrateful as an adult. She never told stories about wanting me. She told stories about enduring me. The DNA results came first. Margaret and Russell were not my biological parents. I stared at the result until the letters blurred. I had prepared myself for it. That didn't make it less devastating. There is something uniquely destabilizing about discovering that 2 people who controlled your entire understanding of where you came from had been looking you in the face for 33 years and choosing not to tell you. The hospital records came a few days later. They connected me to Lillian. My birth date. The procedure. The scar. The notation about the infant being discharged into temporary family care after Lillian's health declined. Then the financial documents started making sense. Lillian had left a modest estate. There was also an insurance payout. It wasn't some giant fortune. That almost made it worse. It was enough to matter, but not enough to create some fantasy of wealth. The funds were supposed to be used for my care, with remaining money preserved for my benefit. Instead, old records showed transfers that didn't line up with that purpose. One transfer coincided with a major household debt being paid. Another matched the period when my parents bought Adrian an expensive first car. Another, much later, appeared connected to a wedding-related payment. My attorney was careful. He told me tracing decades-old money would take time. Some uses might have been permitted. Some might not. Accounting records would matter. But one thing was already clear. My parents had spent my whole life telling me how much I had cost them while using resources that had come with me. They made me feel like a burden while benefiting from the money intended to protect me. I wasn't their difficult daughter. I was the child they got paid to keep quiet about. The first person I confronted was Aunt Lorraine. I called her and asked one question. "Who is Lillian?" Silence. Then she said, "Elizabeth, I don't think this is something we should discuss over the phone." That sounds like an answer. It was complicated. Were Margaret and Russell my biological parents? Another silence. Then Lorraine started crying. I didn't comfort her. That was new for me. She said the family had been told that I was never supposed to know because telling me would confuse me. I asked, "Who decided that?" "Margaret mostly." "Did Dad know?" "Yes." "Did you?" "I knew some." "How much?" "That Lillian was your mother. That Margaret and Russell were raising you." I didn't know the details about the money. I closed my eyes. "Did Margaret tell you not to mention Lillian around me?" "Yes." "Did you ever think maybe I deserved to know?" Lorraine cried harder. "It wasn't my place." I said. "Silence made it easier for them, didn't it?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I didn't confront my parents in person. I sent an email. It was short. I told them I had DNA results, hospital records, estate documents, and financial records. I told them I had spoken to an attorney. I told them I was giving them one chance to tell the immediate family the truth before the next pre-wedding dinner. I ended with one sentence. From now on, anything about money, records, or my identity goes in writing. Mom called 11 times. I didn't answer. Dad called once. Then he left a voicemail. Elizabeth, after everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? You need to stop before this gets worse. I saved it. Mom finally responded by email. She didn't answer a single factual question. Instead, she wrote that I was unstable, jealous of Adrian, obsessed with the past, and trying to punish the family because I couldn't tolerate his happiness. Adrian texted me 20 minutes later. You're really doing this before my wedding? I replied. Did you know there was money connected to me? He responded. What does that have to do with my wedding? I wrote. That wasn't my question. He didn't answer for 3 hours. Then, I heard stuff over the years. I didn't know everything. That money stuff was between Mom and Dad. That message hurt in a different way. Adrian had known something. Enough to know there was money. Enough to know it was connected to me. Enough to understand that our parents were hiding information. He just hadn't cared because the arrangement worked for him. I saved the message. The pre-wedding family dinner was held 2 weeks later. I almost didn't attend. My attorney had told me I was under no obligation to turn a family meal into a legal confrontation. But Mom had already started telling relatives that I was threatening her. So I went. Not to attack anyone. To correct the record. I brought a thick envelope of copies. Not every document. Just 3. The DNA result. The hospital record connecting me to Lillian. And one financial document showing money designated for my benefit being transferred into an account controlled by my parents. When I arrived, Mom was already working the room. I could tell from the way people looked at me. Some sympathetic. Some wary. Some uncomfortable. Hannah looked exhausted. Grace gave me a small nod. Aunt Lorraine wouldn't meet my eyes. Dinner had barely started when Mom made her move. She set down her fork and said, I think we need to address what Elizabeth has been doing. Dad muttered, Margaret. But this time it wasn't a warning to her. Sounded like fear. Mom continued. She has been trying to blackmail us with old confusion and private family matters. I said nothing. Adrian leaned back in his chair. She's trying to ruin my wedding because she can't stand not being the center of attention. Hannah turned to him. Adrian. What? That's what she's doing. I took the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. The sound was small. It still silenced the room. I looked at Mom and Dad. I gave you a chance to tell them the truth. You chose another performance. Mom's face changed. Do not do this. I opened the envelope. I'm not going to show everyone every document. I'm going to show 3. Dad said quietly, This is not the place. I looked at him. You've had 33 years to choose the place. No one spoke. I handed the DNA result to the relative sitting closest to me, then the hospital record, then the financial document. The papers moved around the table. People started reading. Someone asked, Who is Lillian? Mom said, This is private. I said, Lillian was my biological mother. That sentence was the first time I had said it out loud in front of them. My voice didn't shake. Mom's did. We raised you. I know. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a home. I know. You would have had nothing. I looked at the financial document in front of her. That's not true, is it? She stared at me. I said, You didn't raise me as your daughter. You raised me as the bill you got paid to keep quiet. Mom pushed back from the table. That is disgusting. Dad said, Stop. But this time relatives were asking questions. Who signed this? Why wasn't she told? Where did the money go? What does this transfer mean? Dad's face went gray. Mom stood up. I gave that girl a home. I stood too, but I didn't raise my voice. You don't get to call it love because you fed me while stealing the truth from me. Her eyes filled with tears. That used to undo me. It didn't anymore. She looked around the table. See what she's doing? She wants to humiliate us. Grace finally spoke. No. She wants the truth acknowledged. Mom turned on her. You stay out of this. Grace didn't move. I knew Lillian. The room went still again. Grace looked at me, then at everyone else. I remember the baby. I remember the procedure. I remember the scar. Mom snapped. You barely knew her. That doesn't make the scar disappear. Then I looked at Aunt Lorraine. She immediately started shaking her head. I asked, did Margaret know who my mother was? Lorraine whispered, Elizabeth. Yes or no? Mom said, Lorraine, don't. That was all it took. Everyone heard it. Lorraine closed her eyes. Yes. Mom slammed her palm against the table. That is not what I meant. Lorraine looked miserable. You told us not to bring up Lillian around Elizabeth. It was better for her. You said Elizabeth could never know. Mom went silent. I watched something collapse in the room. Not a relationship. A story. The story Mom had spent decades controlling. Then Hannah turned to Adrian. You knew there was money connected to her, didn't you? Adrian rubbed his face. I didn't know everything. Hannah's voice stayed calm. That wasn't my question. He looked at Mom. That was the worst possible thing he could have done. Hannah saw it. So you knew. I heard things. What things? That there was some account. I thought it was family money. Connected to Elizabeth? I don't know. I pulled out my phone. I have your message. Adrian glared at me. Seriously. I read it. I heard stuff over the years. I didn't know everything. That money stuff was between Mom and Dad. Hannah stared at him. He said, I was a kid when I first heard about it. And you're 29 now. I didn't think it was my business. You accepted money from them. So did everybody. Was any of it hers? I don't know. Hannah reached for her engagement ring and twisted it around her finger. She didn't take it off. Somehow that made the moment more serious. She said, the wedding is paused. Adrian stared at her. What? This wedding is paused until I know what I'm marrying into. Mom immediately said, Hannah, don't let Elizabeth destroy your future. Hannah looked at her. Elizabeth didn't make any of you lie. Nobody had an answer to that. The dinner ended in chaos, but not the kind people imagine. Nobody screamed for 20 minutes. Nobody threw plates. It was worse. People quietly picked up documents and asked practical questions. Dad refused to answer. Mom kept repeating that she had done her best. Adrian followed Hannah into the hallway. Lorraine cried into a napkin. Grace sat beside me for a while without saying anything. Eventually Mom came over and whispered, Are you happy now? I looked at her. No. That seemed to shock her. She expected revenge to look joyful. It didn't. I was relieved. Furious. Grieving. But happy wasn't the word. The immediate fallout was ugly. The wedding was postponed. Not canceled. Hannah told Adrian she needed full transparency before she would set a new date. That included what he knew when he knew it, and whether any wedding expenses had come from funds that should have belonged to me. Adrian blamed me for about 48 hours. Then, once Hannah stopped answering his defensive messages, he started blaming Mom. That was predictable. He had spent his entire life looking for someone else to absorb consequences. This time there was no one available. Mom called relatives and tried to get ahead of the story. She told people I was confused about an adoption. There had been no honest adoption story presented to me. She said the money had all gone to my care. The documents suggested otherwise. She said Grace had manipulated me. Grace had done nothing except recognize a scar and give me a name. Dad left one more voicemail telling me I had crossed a line. My attorney sent a formal letter requesting preservation of records and an accounting of certain funds. After that, Dad stopped leaving threatening voicemails. His emails became very careful. Mom hated the written-only rule. She would call and leave messages like, "I'm your mother. Pick up the phone." I never responded by phone. I wrote, "If this concerns records, money, or accusations, put it in writing." She replied, "You are being cruel." I wrote, "I am being clear." The legal process was less dramatic than family drama makes these things sound. There was no instant recovery. No judge handing me a giant check. No police showing up at my parents' door. There were document requests, old bank records, insurance paperwork, questions about what expenses had legally been permitted for my care, and which had not. The estate attorney explained that some records were incomplete, and some claims could be limited by time. I might never recover every dollar. I understood that. What mattered to me was that the paperwork now had to be examined by people who were not emotionally invested in protecting Margaret's version of events. One of the more painful discoveries was that some of the money really had been used for me. Medical expenses, school expenses, ordinary care. That complicated my anger. Then we found other transfers, household debts, money that lined up with major expenses for Adrian. A transfer during the period when he got his first car. A later withdrawal around the time wedding deposits were being paid. Adrian swore he had never known where the money came from. Maybe that was true. My attorney told me not to assume intent where records could answer instead. So I stopped arguing with Adrian. I sent him one message. "I'm not asking for your feelings. I'm asking for records." He didn't like that. But he eventually produced statements and receipts when Hannah insisted. Hannah and I didn't become best friends. That would have felt fake. She apologized to me once. She said, "I believed some things about you because I heard them often enough." I told her, "I figured." She looked embarrassed. I should have asked. "Yes." She nodded. That was enough. She and Adrian entered counseling. The wedding remained postponed. I told both of them I wouldn't attend any wedding unless the financial questions were resolved and my family stopped publicly lying about what happened. That wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. Adrian accused me of making his marriage conditional on my approval. I told him, "Your marriage is not my business. My presence is." He didn't have much to say after that. A few weeks after the dinner, Grace invited me to meet her alone. She brought a small envelope. Inside were copies of 2 old photographs. Lillian was in both. I had her eyes. That sounds like the kind of thing people say because they want it to be true. But I did. Same heavy eyelids. Same slightly uneven smile. In one photo she was holding a paper cup and laughing at something outside the frame. In the other she was standing beside Grace and 2 other women I didn't recognize. Grace said, "She was funny." I stared at the photo. What else? Grace thought for a moment. Private, stubborn, very affectionate with people she trusted. I laughed once. That sounds familiar. Grace smiled. Then she gave me a photocopy of a thank you note Lillian had once sent her. The handwriting matched the letter in the document box. I traced the loops of the letters with my finger. Grace said quietly, "She loved you. I'm sorry nobody told you that." That was the first time I cried in front of her. Not because I suddenly felt whole. I didn't. Knowing Lillian loved me did not restore the years I had lost. It didn't give me memories. It didn't make Margaret's betrayal smaller. It just gave me a different starting point. For 33 years I had been told I should be grateful anyone put up with me. Now I had written proof that before all of that someone had wanted me protected. Someone had asked that I grow up knowing I was wanted. The people trusted with that request had done almost the exact opposite. Mom's final big attempt came through a letter. A real paper letter. 3 pages. She wrote about how hard it had been to take in a child after Lillian died. She wrote about sleepless nights, school pickups, illnesses, birthday cakes, braces, groceries. Some of it was true. That was what made the letter hard to read. Margaret had cared for me in real ways. She had also lied to me. People want those 2 facts to cancel each other out. They don't. A person can make you soup when you are sick and still manipulate you. A person can pay for braces and still hide your identity. A person can tuck you into bed and later use your existence as emotional debt. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "After everything we gave you, I cannot believe you would do this to us." I replied by email. I kept it short. "You raised me and I acknowledge that. Raising me did not give you ownership of my identity, my inheritance, or my silence. Care does not become a lifetime debt because you chose to keep secrets. I will communicate through counsel about records and money. I will not discuss blame by phone." She responded within 5 minutes. "I am still your mother." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote, "That relationship is not yours to define alone." I blocked her number after that. Not permanently necessarily, but long enough to hear my own thoughts without her voice in them. Dad has complied with the attorney requests more than Mom has. He still acts as if he was somehow less responsible because he was quieter. I no longer allow that. When he once wrote, "Your mother handled most of these decisions," I answered, "Your signature appears on the account documents." He never used that excuse again. Aunt Lorraine has apologized several times. The first apology was full of explanations. The second was better. She wrote, "I knew enough to know silence helped Margaret, and I chose silence because it was easier. I have not forgiven her. I have not cut her off either. For now, that relationship exists at a distance. Adrian and I barely speak. He is dealing with debt he expected our parents to help cover. Their financial support has become much more limited now that old transactions are being reviewed. He told me once that I had blown up everyone's life. I said no. I stopped holding the lid down. He hated that answer. I meant it. For years, my role in the family was not simply to help. It was to absorb. Absorb work. Absorb blame. Absorb debt. Absorb discomfort. Absorb contradictions. The family functioned because I kept turning unfairness into silence. The engagement dinner was just the first night I refused. I still have the silver bracelet. It is in a small box with Lillian's letter and the 2 photographs Grace gave me. Sometimes I read the letter and feel angry. Sometimes I feel sad. Sometimes I feel almost nothing. That has been one of the stranger parts of all this. I thought discovering the truth would create one huge emotion. Instead, it has come in layers. I grieve the mother I never knew. I grieve the childhood story I lost. I grieve the possibility that if someone had told me the truth when I was younger, I might have understood myself differently. But I don't grieve the role I had in my family. I am done with that role. I no longer go to dinners where I am expected to cook while everyone else talks. I don't loan Adrian money. I don't respond to Mom's accusations through relatives. If someone calls me to say, "Your mother is devastated," I answer, "She can put anything relevant in writing." If Dad says the family needs to heal, I tell him healing without facts is just another request for silence. The legal accounting is still being worked through, but the path is clear. Records first. Money second. Relationships only after truth. I may never get every dollar back. I may never get every apology. I will probably never know every conversation that happened about me before I was old enough to remember. But the most important thing they took from me was never money. It was authorship. They decided who I was before I had the language to challenge them. The difficult one. The expensive one. The ungrateful one. The one who owed everyone. The one born to carry the family. Now I know that story began with a lie. I was Lillian's daughter before I was Margaret's burden. I was wanted before anyone taught me to feel indebted for existing. And whatever happens with the accounts, the postponed wedding, or the relationships that survive this, that part is no longer negotiable. I wasn't born to carry anyone's family. I was born before they turned me into an excuse. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.